Who are you?
Who are you? I think you're my son.
It's my dad. 여기는 우리 아빠하고 저 이제 여행으로 웨일즈로 왔는데 오늘은 우리 아빠랑 좀 음악 얘기 해보려고 그거 하면서 나도 내 첫 번째 음악 기억도 나올 것 같아서 재밌게 보세요. So, let's start, right?
Yes.
It's 1960.
That's when I was born.
Yep. What are your earliest musical memories, do you think?
Well, I have memories of probably in the middle 60s. One of the first records I think I got was, which my parents would have bought me, was the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann.
Got this right here.
Which I rather liked. It was a rather fun record.
This is the Beach Boys, 1965, Barbara Ann. With Girl Don't Tell Me on the B-side. So, why did you get that?
I liked the song.
You were 5 years old.
Yes. I liked what I liked.
How did you buy it when you were 5?
Well, I think my either mother or grandmother would have bought it for me because I would have heard it possibly on some television channel, and we didn't have many in those days, and I thought, oh, I like that, and someone would have bought it for me.
Okay. So like you were, I want that one.
Yes.
Did you hear a lot of music through what, TV or from?
Well, TV didn't exist very much in those days.
Yeah.
You only had a couple of channels, and they weren't on for many hours of the day.
All right.
I used to have other records, but they weren't necessarily. I mean, it's interesting. I had some blue records that were things like Thomas the Tank Engine, which was rather fun to play on my gramophone.
That's popular in Korea.
One day, Thomas was in the yard. Suddenly, he heard an engine whistling. Help! Help!
And it was. They were very good, and I used to have, because I had the books, and I used to have. I remember these little blue records that they were all the Thomas the Tank Engine stories. They were great fun.
All right. And then, okay, so that was when you were 5 years old.
And a little bit older.
Skipping a bit. Last Christmas, 우리 아빠가 저한테 크리스마스 선물 줬는데 그게 T-Rex 싱글이었는데 아버지, T-Rex 어떻게, I mean, how did you first get into T-Rex? That would have been, what, 1972 or 3?
Well, I was obviously going into sort of 12, going into teens, and T-Rex, which I think started off as Tyrannosaurus Rex, but they then became T-Rex, and I liked the sound. I mean, there was like Mark Bolan doing like I Like to Boogie. There was on the White Swan song. There was.
I think was T-Rex quite like outrageous at the time?
Oh, as a sort of young, sort of pre-teenager, they were quite scary.
Scary.
Yes.
Did you first see them on TV or what?
I think I would have seen them on Top of the Pops. And they had funny hairstyles, and they were like sort of, they were quite scary at the time, but I liked the sound.
Do you remember what song in particular?
I always remember Children of Revolution, which was good.
Wow, okay.
20th Century Boy was great.
Yeah, that's the one you got me for Christmas.
Yes, well, I think I would have got it at the time.
But T-Rex, I mean, was T-Rex, that was like glam music. Was that very different from like, say, David Bowie or Elton John or whatever?
Well, it was, and that was, T-Rex started glam rock, which then people like Slade and other people sort of carried in.
Weirdly, I think Slade never really got much far outside of the UK. No. Even like in America, they weren't very popular. But
no, they were very, very much UK orientated.
Yeah. But especially like, what about David Bowie? How did that affect you?
I remember about that time getting the Genie, which again was I rather liked the sound. I don't think at the time I understood it. Looking back on it, it's a much more interesting song, but I rather liked it at the time.
So
and I do remember
shock value.
Well, I just remember getting it because in those days, if I liked what I heard, I got it. I didn't necessarily understand it, but it was good.
All right. In that case, can we get some kind of background? Where were you again at that time? Where were you living?
Well, I was half the time I was at a horrible boarding school.
But where? It wasn't London, was it?
No. It was a sort of the Manchester area, which is, I mean, the south side, which was, let us say, the better side of Manchester.
Yeah. So then, looking on a bit forward, I can see we got some quite tasty Blondie records here.
Yes.
These might be quite popular in Korea as well.
Well, we're moving on a little bit now.
Yeah, this would have been 76, 78, right? So that's when you were out of the boarding school, was it?
No, I was still, certainly in 76, 77, I was still in boarding school.
Yeah.
I moved away and became an 18-year-old in 78. But I do remember that when Blondie was around, I mean, it was quite exciting, and I got not only some of the LPs, but also quite a lot of the singles, because I just thought they were jolly good songs.
You just like the music?
Yes.
They were, do you think, were they kind of a part of any particular movement? Was it like part of any pop or punk thing, or you just weren't really, that didn't really matter to you?
Well, at the time, I don't know, I just went with what I liked. I wasn't aware of sort of what you call genres or anything, which subsequently one's become a little bit more aware of. I do have actually in the house, as you might have seen. I bought, when I first went to London in 78, a rather nice sort of little picture of Debbie Harry, which I thought was rather good. And I bought that in Soho back in those days. Yeah. And it still adorns our walls today.
All right, good. I know, I mean, this was around the time of when punk was happening?
Well, I don't think I understood when punk started, but what I would say is that very often in each decade of music, certainly back from the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, that the year 7 in the decade went into the next era. So it wasn't on the year 0, it was usually about 3 years before.
Oh, yeah.
And punk started from, and I didn't have much knowledge of it at the time, but looking back with hindsight, that it was when we'd moved out of that sort of 70s era, which in effect started in 67, and punk came in, and I didn't really understand punk, and I wasn't something I was particularly interested in at the time. I mean, however, when looking back, it was, although at the time it was quite radical, I think with hindsight, it was quite tame.
Yeah. I think that's a good point you make, that was kind of the start of the 80s in a way, because everything that happened after that, that was kind of a big shift away from Pink Floyd guitar solos or whatever. That was a much more break into like something more immediate and punchy, which kind of went throughout the 80s, I guess.
Well, it did, and I mean, the latter 70s, I mean, I say, were the beginning of the 80s. And personally, I say, people like Blondie were the sort of ones I liked. I mean, I quite like the Police with hindsight, but I don't think I necessarily did at the time. But there were some great songs that came out from there.
Okay. And then I guess I was going to have a quick go through kind of main historical points that maybe people know about, that you witnessed firsthand. I got here, Beatles record, maybe not the most popular one, but it's 1964 For Sale. You'd have been 4 years old when that came out.
That would have been similar to when I got Barbara Ann.
Ah, you said you liked the Beatles.
Well, there's some great songs on that, and the Beatles were in many ways, they were still what you call the original Beatles, because as I've just been saying, that when you get to 67 and you get Sgt. Pepper, you go into the psychedelic era. The Beatles, when they started, were doing it slightly differently, and I liked those songs, and I would have acquired that record, albeit as a child, but I used to like the music.
With 67, I mean, you're only 7 years old. You weren't that bothered about psychedelic stuff, I guess.
At the time, I had no idea about it. But with hindsight, I'm fully aware of what it was.
Okay. And then, so when the Beatles broke up, is that 1970? Were you aware of that?
Was it 70 or 69?
Maybe
I
69.
think it was.
Let It Be came out in 70, but I think they'd broken up.
They'd sort of broken up, and they'd basically been around in effect since 62. The Beatles really, given how big a group they are, they're only really around for about 7 years.
Yeah.
And at the time, ironically, I mean, that probably didn't really register with me. It's only with the benefit of hindsight.
It wouldn't have seemed that important, maybe.
No, not to me at the time, because I was only like 9,
you were a kid
10.
as well, yeah.
So,
at what point did you think more of the Beatles, or did you never really?
well, I've always liked the Beatles' music.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be, because I was far too young. I wasn't what you call a Beatles groupie or anything like that, because I clearly wasn't sort of around to be one of those. But I did like the songs, and I say, as I've got older, I mean, one's much more aware of the whole history of them, and I certainly think that that John Lennon was very much probably the most important of the four.
Yeah.
And I mean, when he went off with Yoko Ono, then they did some wonderful things. One of the songs I really love is the Ballad of John and Yoko.
It's a good song.
It's a great song. It's one of the greatest songs I think of all time.
Yeah. Beatles or Rolling Stones?
Well, I always liked the Rolling Stones.
More than the Beatles?
I think I was more in tune with them, and I think that...
I guess because they were still happening in the 70s.
Exactly, yes.
So it was as you were a teenager.
And Mick Jagger is a very interesting character who has sort of really transcended the decades.
He's transcended this mortal coil.
Yes, more so than anybody else, more so than any of the Beatles.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, Paul McCartney might want to sort of be number 2, but Mick Jagger has always, I think, been number 1.
Yeah. You like him now?
I think he's an amazing character.
Yeah.
And he's still Mick Jagger, which is pretty amazing, given that he's rather old now.
They got an album out this year, you know.
I know. Well, yes, I'm aware.
I'll get you that as a present if you want. All right, that's very interesting. Okay, so 70s. I guess this would have been your main kind of formative time.
Yes.
You didn't much care about David Bowie that much.
Oh, I've
been getting a lot into David Bowie recently.
I liked David Bowie. He went through some very.
I think he kind of.
Well, he became Ziggy Stardust for a time, and
yeah. But then after that, he almost kind of he was almost ahead of punk. He was almost doing like post-punk stuff while punk was happening at the time.
I think David Bowie was a guy who, as you say, was ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And I generally speaking, liked his music. I don't know enough about it to make big comment, but I always liked what he did.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious about the punk as like because you were like living near Manchester, and it seemed like it was the Sex Pistols quite very kind of London based.
But I moved to London in '78, so
okay.
So
were you kind of meeting punks, or were you seeing them, or did it feel like it really mattered, or is it something that over history has become bigger than it really was?
When I moved to London, music wasn't the driving force. I was aware that there were what you called punks who used to be wandering around the streets. And I thought they looked a bit odd. And it didn't really register with me too much. But when I look back on those, in a way, really quite calm days, they looked like they were quite challenging. But in fact, they were quite tame.
Yeah, it was all kind of like making yourself look scary to protect the kind of more...
Yeah, but actually being really quite not scary at all.
Very interesting. All right. So that was 78. You were in London when you were 18.
That's when I moved to London, yes.
What were you doing then?
Well, very boring. I went to work in a bank in the city of London.
Bloody hell, I didn't know that. How long were you there?
About a year.
What happened?
Well, I stopped that because I had other interests, and then I got into an insurance company, which I worked in again for about another 3 years.
All right. That's good. It's very interesting. The 80s. I don't really know.
A good decade.
Better than the 70s?
Well, depends when you were born.
You mean how old you were?
Well, for me, I was in my 20s in the 80s.
Yeah. It's going to be a good time.
And when you're in your 20s, that's a very good time. And you remember that. I mean, when you're in your teens in the 70s, which I was, 70s were great, but I was a grown-up in the 80s. And that made a difference.
But you said you weren't really there for music, but I mean, I know when I was a lad, a lot of like 80s pop stuff used to play quite a lot.
Oh, because that was sort of very much still what I remember in what I call the good years.
All right. So what are the best songs in the 80s?
Oh goodness, that's like a bit of a
Best bands?
It wasn't much bands. I liked certain people. I mean, just to sort of go to what we've had recently. I mean, we've had even Mumbles yesterday. I mean, Bonnie Tyler was sort of taken down there in her coffin, having done Total Eclipse of the Heart. I remember that song when it first came out. She was a lady from Wales. It was a great song.
Together we can take it to the end of the line. The love is like a shadow on me all of the time.
I mean, there were people like Shakin' Stevens, who was from Wales. There was Adamant and all that sort of stuff, and it was quite fast going music.
Yeah.
There was some
Did
other.
you ever think it was post-punk, or was it just pop music?
Well, it was punk had sort of was coming to its end by then. It was.
Yeah, it was over.
I mean, I personally like people like Eurythmics, who.
Yeah, I can say I got that noted down. There was a lot of Eurythmics in the car when I was a child.
Sweet dreams are made of these. Who am I to disagree?
There was no. I thought. I mean, it was like. And I go back to what I can only say, because you're much more musical than I am, and you have far more understanding of it. All I do is if I like something, I like it, and if I like it, I listen to it.
Yeah. All right. What about John Lennon dying? What was that in that 1980?
That was 1980. I mean, at the time, and we're going slightly back now, but I mean, I remember it was a shock. It was quite a big shock, because it was, and an assassination is a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And all I would say is that I think, and this is probably slightly controversial, but the death of John Lennon gave Paul McCartney an advantage in that he's had a more successful career after John Lennon than he would have had John Lennon not been shot.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree, but I think that's a bit...
But maybe that's just a sort of...
you can't shit on the guy too much, though.
No, I'm not shitting on anybody, but I think John Lennon still had a lot more to give.
Yeah.
And sadly, obviously, what happened was the end of it.
Yeah, okay. So what were the highlights of the 80s musically, do you think?
Well, it wasn't the biggest thing to me, because I was doing other things in the 80s.
So, I mean, just for reference, you weren't really interested in like the Smiths or anything like that?
Not at the time, no.
No. That's fair enough.
I have more knowledge of stuff now than I did necessarily at the time, because, as I say, I mean, I did buy records in the 80s, and they were maybe not, as you would say, some of the best quality of music, but they were stuff I liked.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair enough. And what, in the 80s as well, was it still, there was kind of changing technology? Were you still buying buying tapes or records, or just watching stuff on the TV?
No, I remember buying records, and probably until the early mid-80s. I think sort of by the mid-80s, one wasn't buying records anymore. There was other sort of things like, I think CDs came in and sort of things like
They
that.
were crazy expensive, right?
Well,
originally.
like records were originally when they first came out.
Yeah. How
I
much
mean-
would that have been?
Well, I mean,
64?
I don't know. I didn't buy it. I was given it, but it was, but it would have been at the time quite expensive.
Yeah.
But obviously, a lot of people bought it. So
Yeah.
because all Beatles albums, I don't think there's any Beatles album that didn't sell a lot of copies.
Yeah. And then I was born in the 90s.
Mhm.
So, Oasis or Blur?
Well,
Come on.
that's a bit of a putting me on the spot,
Come on.
and I have to answer that in a negative way. In that,
Suede.
I didn't like Oasis, so I preferred Blur.
Yes, you liked Blur.
I preferred, but I mean,
Wow.
but it's a
That's a scoop.
but I wasn't sort of. It wasn't my biggest music era.
When I guess that if I was you had a little baby suddenly, you probably weren't paying that much attention to.
No, exactly. I mean,
Do you remember anything about Blur? Why Blur? They were kind of more like
well, it's because they weren't Oasis.
so you just hated Oasis.
Well, I wouldn't. Hate is probably a strong word,
Okay.
but let's say I didn't like.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, Blur, their whole thing was kind of almost like a revival of like very old English like seaside songs and stuff, but making it more modern.
well, one of the things I can tell you is back in those days, and you won't remember, is we used to go down to the dock area when we lived down there. Which
In
is
London?
yes. And we occasionally had occasions where you get sort of old sea shanty sort of people coming along, and they'd sort of do a great performance in the docks, and I loved those songs, and they were great.
Like old what docking workers.
Well, they were sea shanties. They were just people from the coast who sang the old songs that people that worked at sea used to sing.
Bloody hell! All right, that's very interesting.
Well, I
They've all
used to
died
like
out
the-
now. That's quite sad.
Well, you occasionally hear them, but they're regarded a little bit, let us say, of the past.
And now, this is the point I wanted to get to. This was probably my first musical education. Came from car rides.
Yes.
You know, you had lots of like cassette tapes
Mm.
with music. It was mostly, as I remember, like 50s rock and roll. That
Oh.
was like a big thing that you
Well,
had a lot of.
as you've said, I was born in 1960.
Yeah.
My personal favourite period of music is the late 50s, with some of the great rock and roll stars of the day.
That's very
No, I
interesting.
don't remember them at the time, but I always loved the music. And why you remember it is because I'd recorded, so on our little cassette machine in the car, when we were going on a reasonable journey, that's what I put on. It kept basically everybody quiet, so I could listen to it, and I could concentrate on the driving. And,
It kept the kids quiet.
well, it did, absolutely.
I listened.
And I mean, but it was, and that's something obviously you have a clear memory of. Now, at the time, I didn't realise you were taking it as much as you obviously turned out to have done so.
So it's kind of like a kid's distraction kind of thing. Was it? No, it must be more than
No,
that.
no, it wasn't. It had nothing to do with the cat. It was actually to do with the fact that's the music I liked.
Okay.
And my favourite music is that period, as I say, from the latter 50s, earlier 60s. And I mean, you've got, I mean, some great people from then.
Yeah.
And they and
We were talking about like 70s, 80s, 90s music, but then at what point was 50s music always there? Was that something? Did that start at some point in your life?
which had always been there, but I mean, it was only when I was older, because when I was young, music had moved on, like as I've just said. But whenever I heard 50s music, I knew I liked it, and some of the music, even in the 80s, and some of the 80s music, was sort of going back to the 50s.
Yeah.
And there were some of the songs almost like, and I can't remember which, but they were going back into that. And because the 80s did have a whole mixture of all sorts.
So would you say after the 80s you got more into 50s stuff again?
Well, I've always liked 50s, and that's
Okay.
the thing. It's sort of,
So some of the stuff, I remember a lot of like Chuck Berry, Eddie Cochran, Elvis,
absolutely.
those kinds of things.
Well, Eddie Cochran, I think, was one of the greatest of all time. I mean,
I'm gonna take 2 weeks, gonna have a fun vacation. I'm gonna take my problem to the union.
Also Beach Boys, a lot I remember actually.
well, the Beach Boys were sort of they came in they were the latter end of that.
Yeah.
I mean, they were in the 60s.
Yeah.
It's the guys in the late 50s. It's like Jerry Lee Lewis. It's I mean, Eddie Cochran particularly, very sadly, he died, as quite a few of those people did, in either plane or
I
car
know. Funnily,
crashes,
he was Mark Bolan, T-Rex's main inspiration.
which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I think he's like one of the original starters of that kind of sound.
Well, he had his guitar. He played it in a way. And in some ways, I mean, a lot of people who play guitar now, and I know you do, look at how Eddie Cochran played it.
Not as good as me.
Well, and I'm not going to disagree with that, obviously. But but the poor chap died at 21.
Yeah.
But he could have been a very, very, very big star.
Well, yeah. Maybe he's more like a musician's musician.
Well,
Anyway.
that's your far too technical when you ask me questions like that.
No, I mean he's not as big as like he's not the name as much as Jerry Lee Lewis or Chuck Berry or whatever. But he's someone that people who like music know about a lot
Well,
more.
Chuck Berry was one of those interesting phenomenons who he transcended
Yeah.
a number of decades.
Yeah. He made the Beatles in a way.
Oh yes, I mean the Beatles only came into being because of the guys in the 50s.
Yeah.
And it was that sound that it had a buzz, it was fast, it was exciting, it was challenging the future.
Yeah. I mean, like for me, I've never really gone out and sort of looked for much 50s music, but I feel like I just absorbed it. Because like our grandparents lived about 2 hours drive away, or like 3 hours sometimes.
Yes.
So every holiday we'd have a drive, and I'd sit there and just listen to this like rock and roll music.
Exactly, which is what I liked, and that it made me maybe drive safer because I was listening to stuff I enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I know
It was good.
Is that surprising that I absorbed it so much? I don't know.
I think it is a bit of a surprise actually, because I just thought you were just thinking, oh God, and at least you didn't always say, "Are we there yet?" which some kids used to. You obviously were quite content listening to it.
I liked it a lot, but even like to me now, it's like it's car music. I don't even think about it as, for me, it's like it's so deeply
Ingrained.
in me, yeah. But it's like it's the car music when I was a kid.
Well, maybe I did you a service.
I think so, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think a lot of kids maybe don't get that kind of thing. I don't know.
No. So anyway, that was
Anyway, so I guess towards the end now, when I was about 15, 16, started getting very into music, like playing guitar and going to Reading Festival and whatnot.
yes.
How did that look like from the outside?
Well, I realised you were very much into music, and but in those particular days, music wasn't the biggest thing, and that period of time wasn't, for me, necessarily the best period.
You went into Arctic Monkeys.
Well, I heard them, and I did quite like one or two of their songs, by the way. But,
Yeah.
but I wasn't really music at that point. Wasn't sort of wasn't
Golden
my big
era.
issue. But I was in a way I was always quite pleased and happy that music was something that mattered to you,
Yeah.
and so it was very much a let you go and do and let you explore, and then how you would work out your music going into the future.
All right. Remember, I at some point, probably after I was like 15 or 16 or 17, I used to like play CDs in the car a lot. So it's kind of like the roles kind of reversed in that way.
Yes.
What did you think of? You didn't really. That was just like strange music.
It wasn't that much strange. I mean, I don't think we had quite the same long journeys in those
No,
days,
true.
did we?
Yeah.
So it's sort of
I have one very strong memory of like going to like Tesco or something shopping and playing a Cribs CD by the Cribs.
yes.
Listen to it, and like we got back and one of the songs was playing, and it hadn't. The song was only halfway through, and like we'd arrived home. You like just stopped the car, and like, oh, you're not getting out, and like, no, I want to hear the rest of this song. Do you remember that?
Now you prompt me. Yes.
That was the Cribs Martell. It was so strange to me because I thought you didn't really care about the music that I liked.
No.
Some of the songs were really good, right?
No, I always worked on the basis that if anybody, but obviously you in particular, if you were clearly enjoying whatever the music was.
I wasn't enjoying
then-
it, you were.
I mean, I was enjoying what you put on.
Yeah, that you wouldn't get out of the car. Happened twice. There was once with the Cribs and once with Animal Collective. There was fireworks.
But it would have been songs that I
If you
just
like
like.
the song,
I just, as I go back to what I was saying earlier, if I like something, I like it. I'm not musical as you are, and I don't have the sort of finesse in terms of understanding it. But if I like it, I like it, and I don't. If it's halfway through, I want to hear the end.
All right. Finally, Korea. You've been there once.
Yes.
You know, I went there a while ago. What would you think of that?
You went to Korea for 14 years. No, 14 years ago now.
Yeah,
yes, so
14 years.
I remember when you went to Korea, and it was an interesting thing. I took you to the station in Gloucestershire, in England, 'cause that's where we were at the time, and you went on a one-way ticket, in effect, and you made a fantastic life subsequently.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think of YouTube?
Well, YouTube's quite good for catching up on the past.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah. It's always like everything's there now, right? What do you look up?
Well, some of the stuff we've been talking about today. Sometimes I sort of go to YouTube and I come up with one or two of the songs I used to like in the past and watch them and listen to them, and it's great.
Oh yeah. So but when you were a kid, some sudden thought, like, did your parents play stuff, or did you have a similar thing to what I had, or was that not really?
When I was a kid, I mean, obviously things like YouTube didn't exist. I mean, we had a television, and I mean, it had 2 channels, and those channels were only on for about 6 hours a day, and they didn't really have much music. If any music that was on was ever a thing called Top of the Pops, which sort of. And when I was at home, because I was sent to a horrible boarding school, and Top of the Pops was on a Thursday. And when I was at school, you couldn't watch it, but in the holidays, one could. And I always used to watch Top of the Pops because it was the only music that you could see on television. And some of it is why, and it fits in with what we've just been saying, that you saw these people who just there performing, and I thought, well, I like that. There was some of the stuff I didn't particularly like, but it was always worth watching.
Yeah.
And it was so relaxing compared to today. Like, you didn't have the mass security, the people were there. I never went to Top of the Pops itself, but you used to get the few people who went there, they were dancing away with the bands they liked, and I used to love watching it.
Okay. I think we're about the end. Do you have a message for the viewers?
Well, I don't know. I mean, all I can say is that you're doing what you're doing, and I know that you obviously do a lot of music in Korea, and you, I think, have quite a successful music career, and all I wish is the best for you, and I hope it carries on.
All right, good. Say, 화이팅!
Fighting!
감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Perfect.